Spalding from Handgun Combatives coming at you from the range. So if you hear some gunfire in the background, that's why. What I want to talk to you today is about the Glock pistol. Now, I've got several custom Glocks, as you can see. Very nicely appointed, have all the goodies on them, you know, carry bevel and, you know, grip reductions and stippling and all that fantastic stuff. But the fact of the matter is that you don't have to have this stuff to shoot the Glock well. The great thing about the Glock is that you can pretty much pick up a Glock and it works really well from the box. In the rain, the sun, the sand, the typhoon, whatever. They work all the time. But then again, contrary to what Mr. Glock may tell you, the Glock isn't perfect. In my opinion, it needs a few things. At one time, I had to have a grip reduction on my Glocks in order to shoot them well. With the new 4th generation, they've removed quite a bit of the material. I could actually use that gun as is and probably be quite happy with it. There are some things, though, that I think have to be done. First of all, the plastic sights have to go. Do the plastic sights on the Glock work? Yeah, I mean, they're functional. You could use them. I find a lot of people will shoot high with the factory sights, and the reason for that is if you ever take the time to line up those factory sights, you know, equal height, equal light, and then notice that the front white dot is partially covered. So people tend to lift that front sight up so they can see that whole white dot. They end up kind of shooting high. I've also seen some people work really well with them, but the fact of the matter is that they're plastic. You start manipulating the gun with one hand, doing some of the things you need to do with a combat pistol, they're going to be gone. Now on this 4th gen gun, I've got my Dave Spalding sights from Ameriglow. They're like the cap sights, except they have the flat black serrated rear. What I like about these sights is that they're a square in a square. It doesn't make much sense to me to try to line up straight edges, again, equal height, equal light, and do that with round dots. So I've got a square and a square. It comes in orange, it comes in a lime green color. However, sights are up to you and works great for your eyes. Another thing I like to have, that I have to have, is I have to have a taller extended magazine button. And you can see I have that on both my custom pistol and the stock pistol. It's not that the stock one doesn't work, it's that my hands are small, and if I want to get a good purchase on the gun to pop that magazine out, I have to have that, so it's something that replaces. I also like to have a usable slide lock lever. Now there's another video on that will be on the YouTube channel that talks about the bullet forward slide lock lever, how I designed it, why I like it, but it's usable. I can do things with it, so I like to replace that. Beyond that, the only thing that I think needs to be replaced is the trigger connector. It's not that the 5.5 pound connector in the Glock that is stock isn't usable. It is usable. As a matter of fact, it's probably more usable than all of the double action, single action hammer fired guns, or even worse yet, double action only long trigger hammer fired guns. So usable, but to me, not optimal. What I like to put in my Glock is the Ghost rocket connector. Now, the rocket connector is the model with the trigger control tab. That's that little flange that sticks out that reduces the over travel. Now, yes, you do have to fit that, and that intimidates some people, but if you take your time, you follow the instructions, you do it right, what you end up with is a trigger that when you press it and the striker falls, the trigger stops. So now that's that much less travel that I have to do in order to fire the next shot. And as you can see, that's a pretty short action. Makes that trigger just all the easier to use. And it's not an adjustment screw or something that can come loose. It's a piece of metal, part of the connector that's fitted. Now, a little inside information here for those of you that are watching. There will be a drop-in connector with an over-travel tab. It's something that Arthur Viani at Ghost and I are working on right now. It will be sold exclusively through Handgun Combatives and my website. It will be trigger over travel eliminated, drop-in connector that anyone out there can do very easily. So keep an eye out for that. Sometime this fall we'll be introducing that. So what's the reason that I want to change that trigger connector? Because quite frankly, folks, I'm not that skilled. I'm not that gifted. I've seen a number of very gifted shooters that can do all kinds of things to their trigger and still shoot that gun straight. You know, come all the way off the trigger, slap it, run it all the way home, and they get good hits, but that's not me. I'm more of a minimal trigger manipulator. So the idea that I can work the trigger that little and get shots enhances my shooting ability. So I want a smooth trigger. As a matter of fact, I think a smooth trigger is a combative pistol essential. Why is that? Well, it's because if you have a trigger that you've got snags and glitches and catches as you're trying to move it back, what happens is that human nature, the tendency to want to then work your way through it. And if these fingers start engaging when you're trying to press the trigger, it's going to take the muzzle off target. And let's kind of explain how important that is. At 20 feet, 1/16 of an inch of muzzle movement translates to 4.5 inches on the target. So at a room-sized distance, if I'm trying to hit you in the high chest to get as disabling or as incapacitating a pistol shot as is possible, instead of hitting you here, now I'm over here. And think about how much muzzle movement this is, which is a convulsive grip of the whole hand. I mean, you can conceivably miss the target completely at 20 feet. And if they're not standing square, or if they're kind of standing sideways like this, all the easier to miss somebody. So I've got to have a smooth trigger in my guns. Now, a smooth trigger doesn't mean a light trigger. To me, it doesn't matter if it's 4, 5, 6, 8 pounds, as long as when I start depressing that trigger straight to the rear, it rolls back nice and smooth without snags and catches and glitches. Having an action job done in your gun is nothing new. Back in the late 1970s, when I went into law enforcement, you would buy your Smith & Wesson or your Ruger or your Colt revolver. Everybody had an action job done on them because the factory actions on a revolver were difficult to manipulate. So it was nothing to have an action job. Nobody ever said anything about that. Matter of fact, the only time I know of where a revolver action came into play was because the officer involved manually thumb cocked it, so it was in a single action mode. A lot of agencies got around that by taking the single action cocking notch off of them, which was no big deal. We were all taught to roll the trigger double action. But if you had a smooth trigger, you were a much better shot. So having an action job done on your pistol isn't a big deal. Now, some people will say, well, you know, the liability involved. Okay, fine. Maybe because I was in law enforcement my whole career, I understand the law a little bit. I've looked into lots of lawsuits, and I've testified on the stand. I guess that doesn't intimidate me a lot. Because when I have my triggers done so they're nice and smooth, I'm prepared to take the stand and articulate why that made it more likely for me to hit and less likely to hit an innocent by missing my shot. So having a smooth trigger is just absolutely essential. And in my humble opinion, you cannot get a smoother trigger on your Glock pistol than adding a ghost connector. In my case, again, it's the 3.5 pound rocket. It's 3.5 pounds at the tip. In the center of the trigger face, it's actually 4.5 pounds. And again, where do we depress the trigger? Not at the tip. We depress it in the center. So 4.5 pound connector. If a 4.5 pound connector concerns you because you think it's going to be too light, just put a 6 pound trigger spring or a 6 pound striker spring in it. Boom. You're right back up to 5.5 pounds, but your trigger is much smoother with reduced over travel. So, Glocks are outstanding guns. Yes, they're very, very usable from the factory, but you know, for a little bit of money and a little bit of effort, you can make this gun much more shootable, much faster to shoot, much more likely to be able to save your life. And I don't think you can do any better than going on the Ghost website, ghostinc.com. Check it out. You're going to find a lot of products on there that are really going to enhance your shooting. So, Dave Spalding, Handgun Combatives.